Guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, "Neighbor kicked me out of my own land after building a legal fence around my property." TLDR. My neighbor gets a fake land surveyor to say that my property is his before building an illegal fence. When I cross over to get to my vegetables and water valve, he assaults me and calls the police. I get removed from my own property and have to hire my own surveyor to even fight it. The city finds that I was in the right and I get a restraining order against neighbor. I also take a chainsaw to the part of the fence that is on my property and destroy it. Now he is left with a useless fence that has pieces of it missing and I can actually get to my things again. Is it really that hard to just keep to your own property? If you ask me and the majority of people, the answer would be an obvious yes. If you ask my neighbor, you might get a totally different answer. Anyway, this is a little long, so I am just going to jump right into it. My neighbor decided out of the blue that he needed to build a fence to separate the two properties. I'm not a fan of fences in general, but what a man chooses to do on his own land is his business. I didn't even notice until a couple days after it was built that the fence was actually built on my side of the property line. Now for most people, myself included, this usually wouldn't be that big of a deal. A few feet or inches doesn't mean that much in the long run, but in this case there was a huge issue. I had some plants and even sprinkler system that ended up now on his side of the fence. As you could probably imagine, I was angry that now there was a fence in between me and my own property. The plants were actually a small patch of vegetables that I had spent a long time growing and caring for. I now couldn't get to them and was not happy about this at all. Looking back, I should have said something at this point, but I didn't. Instead, I jumped the fence to take care of my vegetables and adjust the sprinkler. How my sprinkler works is that the whole system is attached to a single valve. That valve is now on the other side of the fence, and without it I have no way to adjust things like turning it off in the winter and when it rains. I say all this to make sure it is clear that this was the worst possible spot a fence could have gone, and it just so happened that while I was dealing with my vegetables and valve, neighbor walked outside of his house and saw me. I will save you the non-existent suspense. He was not happy to see me. Neighbor. What the hell are you doing in my yard? Me. The fence is on my property. Neighbor. This is my fence and my damn yard, and you better get the hell out of here before I make you. I could have left and tried talking to him another time, but I just wasn't having his aggressive attitude. Me. You build the fence over the line. My vegetables and sprinkler valve are right here. I am standing on what is technically still my property. He cuts me off about every other word I say to yell more and doesn't seem to care about anything I have to say. Neighbor. Don't you know how a damn fence works? You better stay the hell off of my land or I swear I will make sure you have nothing. He ends up pushing me down hard and before I can react he goes inside. What I didn't know at the time is that he actually called the police on me. They showed up and saw me on his side of the fence. I tried to explain things to them, but they said that the fence was all they had to go on without a land surveyor and they removed me from my own property. They warned that if I trespassed again, I would be arrested, and neighbor could file charges. I didn't want to go to jail for stepping on my own property. I knew that I needed to get the land surveyed and I wish I had thought of it sooner because neighbor had already hired somebody weeks before. Turns out he had a friend that worked as a land surveyor and had him lie on the forms where the property lines were in order to get the fence built in the first place. I hired a guy of my own who looked up the old documents and walked the land. He concluded that I was in the right and I sent a petition to the city with his data. Now they had two different reports from two different surveyors and couldn't just ignore the problem. They sent a guy of their own to look over the same land for a third and final time. He of course said that I was right, and the fence was encroaching over the property line. It took a while for them to get me back the report on the land, but in the end I was right, and the city knew that the fence was bogus. The story doesn't actually end there though because I wasn't done with neighbor. I followed through to make sure that his friend lost his license over his lies and now was out of a job. I also got a restraining order against neighbor, which meant that he couldn't even be in his own backyard while I was there tending to my vegetables or adjusting my valve. I will admit I took pleasure in going back there when it wasn't really necessary just to see him have to go back inside of his house. He knew that I could and would call the cops on him if he stepped a toe out of line. Of course, one big problem still remained, and that was the fact the fence was still there. Now the fence was actually a little complicated because not all of it was on my property. In fact, only some of it was, so I couldn't force neighbor to actually remove it. My land is my rules though, so what I did was go and get a chainsaw to take care of business. I destroyed every bit of the fence that was considered on my property and not a plank more. I finally had access again to my area without having to constantly hop over a fence and get glared at by neighbor. He even tried getting me arrested a second time for trespassing, only for the police to read the report I had from the city regarding the situation and letting me go. What was left at the end was him having half of a fence that was not just useless but horrifically ugly. Neighbor was furious, and I am sure if it wasn't for the restraining order he would have tried to yell or even assault me again. Instead, I got to watch him from his window as he stared at me while I got to destroy his fence. I don't really care what he ends up doing with that fence or if he just builds a new one in the right spot. All that matters to me is that I have access to my property again and neighbor isn't able to pull a fast one over on me. Like he said himself, this was my damn yard, and I wasn't going to let anybody push me around on it. The next story is titled, "Can't Wait 5 Minutes? Enjoy Your Ticket and Bonus Fines." This happened when I was a fairly small kid, but the story is still legend in both my family and my old neighborhood. Not quite as epic as some of the stories here, but still a good one. My little brother was severely disabled. He could walk but not for long nor very well, so he used a wheelchair if we went out, as well as at school. This meant he had to take the handicap bus to school, and they would have to block the road for about 5 minutes to safely load my brother. Not exactly convenient, but the bus kept to a very rigid schedule to make it easier for people to avoid them on their commute. One afternoon, we came home to discover massive tire tracks tearing up a portion of the front yard across the street from us. The people who lived there were the best neighbors ever, so no one was thrilled to think someone had damaged their yard on purpose. Apparently a guy had been pulling out of his driveway right behind the bus each morning, then throwing a hissy fit when it stopped. The bus aide even tried coming over to speak to him one day, to explain that they have to take their time and be careful, and that if he left his house just a minute or two earlier every day, he could avoid them entirely. The guy cussed out the aide, rolled up his window, and continued with his non-stop honking. After a week of the constant honking, the asshole must have decided he was done with waiting, so he drove through our neighbor's yard to get around the bus. This was illegal in multiple ways, including passing a school bus while the bus is loading and destruction of property. The aide once again tried to talk to the man, he once again blew up at everyone, and that started his new trend of honking for 1 minute, then driving through the neighbor's yard to get around the bus. After a few days of this new routine, the neighbor's yard was a shredded, nasty mud pit from the combo of winter rain and tires. My mom decided enough was enough and, with our neighbor's blessing, she called a different neighbor. This one was an undercover cop. The undercover usually worked on drug busts, but he made it a point to be parked a few houses down with his big work camera the next few mornings, and he snapped some fantastic shots of the guy pulling his little stunt. After 2 days worth of photos, on the third day it was a uniformed officer in a patrol car hiding just out of sight. Sure enough, the asshole honked a couple of times at the stopped bus, then went to pass. The officer immediately flipped on his lights and sirens and pulled the guy over only 2 houses down. The asshole tried to talk his way out of the ticket, but the officer simply handed him a folder full of witness statements and photos. The guy was told he could pay for a couple of tickets and reimburse the family privately for the damage done, or they could press charges for higher offenses, take his license, and have his wages docked to pay back the neighbor. The asshole finally realized he was beat and took the pair of tickets. That evening, he dropped off a check to the neighbors to pay for the yard repairs. We never saw him again. It seemed he finally decided to take a different route to work. The next story is titled, "My Grandmother Tried to Steal My Apartment and Make Me Go Back to My Parents, so she could punish me." I'm 29, and had been dealing with this for some time, but recently this became ridiculous. My grandmother is the most special person I ever knew, and with special, I mean one of the most frustrating, entitled, narcissistic, condescending bitch on earth. She believed that she is the matriarch of the family, the highest authority that we all must obey, and for that, She had done a lot of things to all the family over the years, and recently I became her main objective. A couple months ago she organized a family meeting on her house. Believing it was just a family meal, we all went, and when everyone were there, she revealed her true intentions. It was a trap. Apparently someone told my grandmother that I was dating a girl, my girlfriend. And basically she exposed me to all the family. In that moment, I haven't even told my parents about it yet. The following 30 minutes were a non-stop humiliation in front all my family, saying how a failure I was, a shame to the family, a sinner, and how embarrassed she was that all her church's friends knew I was a shameless pervert. When I couldn't take her shit anymore I got up from my chair, just to be slapped in the face by her for disrespect her. After seeing that the rest of the family finally intervened, getting her apart before she tried to pull my hair. The following weeks, she was nothing more than a constant headache. Endless calls and text messages, telling me such beautiful things as that I will burn for my sins, that I was a disgrace, that I should stop fooling around and correct my life. She even lectured my parents, demanding that they correct me, to make me quit my job and find a husband, because that was the right thing to do and what I should be doing. Also, she took every chance she got to say how evil and selfish I was for ruining her good image. Last Saturday she outdid herself. While I was in my apartment, there was a knock on the door, and when I opened it, I saw that it was her. By that point I was no longer trying to hide my displeasure from her and I just said, "Ah, it's you. What do you want?" Without being invited to come in, she went into my house, began to look around the place with an obvious gesture of disgust and disapproval on her face, and then turned to see me with that look of superiority, as if she were doing me a favor just for be there. She told me that she had already given me more than enough time to reconsider and correct my life, so she was there so that I could apologize to her. I just laughed sarcastically and told her that she was crazy and that she could go now. She then started lecturing me with the same speech again, but I didn't take it. I interrupted her and let out all the things I've wanted to tell her for a long time. That she was a stupid old witch, that she was not an authority figure to anyone, that her presence alone ruins our day, that nobody can stand her. That she is such a horrible and suffocating grandmother and mother, that she should not make it strange that none of her children love her or visit her unless she forces them to. I knew I had hurt her by the way she tensed her face and how she tried to hide the tears in her eyes. It was then that she said, "Enough, I can see that you don't understand the good way, so I will have to correct you in the old way. Give me the keys to this place, you will return to your parents and you will be grounded until you learn to obey and do what I ordered." I still had the keys in my hand from when I opened the door, to which she extended hers, as if waiting for me to give them to her. I laughed. I laughed out loud. This was too ridiculous that I couldn't take it seriously. And apparently that made her so mad that she lunged at me, trying to grab my keys. We struggled, there were screams, things falling out of place. The damn witch got to the point of digging her nails into my arms and biting my hands. The scandal was such that a couple of neighbors went out to see what was going on, and when my grandmother saw them she started shouting that I was a thief and was trying to rob her house. Obviously they didn't believe him, they were my neighbors, they knew me. They separated her from me, and when she saw that they did not believe her, and that I would not obey her, she threatened me with, "Your parents will know about this," and left. Since then, she had been telling to everyone how it insulted her and violently attacked her. We all know her, we all know she is a liar, she just makes everyone lives harder. The last story is entitled House Guests. A few months back, my wife and I offered my driveway to a married couple we have known for a decade to park their RV. They had been trying to move from Michigan to California and said that was the only obstacle they had, finding somewhere to park. Fast forward to the day they arrived. They came in a U-Haul with 6 cats, 2 dogs at 2 a.m. and brought their mattress in. It was 2 a.m. and I was tired and confused and figured we would discuss it in the morning. We all sit down to discuss it and we agree they can stay a few months. Really, I should have been more specific I suppose. 4 months later and I see no signs of them trying to move out. They both got jobs but I'm left cleaning up after the cats and dogs that are destroying my house. They also hadn't been keeping up basic cleaning. Dishes left in their room or in the sink for days, poop all over the toilet bowl. So we all sit down to talk again, about cleanliness, about when they're moving out. And that's when it gets ugly. They start yelling at me for micromanaging them and treating them like children. After an unfruitful conversation where they accused me of lying, saying they told me about the animals and the lack of a trailer and screamed at me for my impossible standards, I just gave up. We gave them 3 weeks to get out. They haven't spoken to me since. I am so utterly frustrated with how entitled they act. I offered up my home and asked for literally nothing in return but cleanliness. No rent or bills have been paid by them. I literally just asked that they keep the house as clean as it was when they moved in. And yet I'm still the villain in their story, for not giving them enough time to buy a house in an impossible market, on minimum wage. I suppose this is a little bit ranty. 1 week left and I can't wait for them to be gone. Update. They're gone, locks are changed. Security cameras installed. Thank you for listening.